Sophia's voice rang out across the crowded reception hall, dripping with mock sweetness. I hear the high school dropout brother is quite the pianist. Why don't we have him play for us? Come on, everyone, let's give him a round of applause. The lavish wedding reception of my brother, Matthew, had been going smoothly until this moment. Sophia, his newly minted wife and a graduate of Juilliard, had just finished a stunning piano performance. I thought that would be the end of the musical entertainment, but apparently, Sophia had other plans. I frantically tried to refuse, waving my hands in protest, but Sophia was already making her way towards me, microphone in hand. Her smile was picture perfect, but I could see the malice glinting in her eyes. Don't be shy, she cooed, grabbing my arm. I'm sure we're all dying to hear what kind of music a high school dropout can play. As she pulled me towards the grand piano, she leaned in close, her voice dripping to a venomous whisper. Listen here, you good-for-nothing waste of space. You're nothing but a prop to make me look better. Try not to embarrass yourself too much, loser. I hope you make a complete fool of yourself. I found myself pushed onto the piano bench, feeling dizzy of anxiety and humiliation. The room seemed to spin around me as I stared at the gleaming keys. From somewhere in the crowd, a drunken voice called out, Go on, dropout! Do you even know which key is middle C? Laughter rippled through the room, making my cheeks burn. As I sat there, frozen, a memory suddenly surfaced. My father's warm, encouraging voice.
You know, Ethan, there's something special about your music. It always manages to lift my spirits.
That's right, I thought. I just need to play the way I always do. Be myself. Taking a deep breath, I gently placed my fingers on the keys. As I did, a sense of calm washed over me, chasing away the nervousness and doubt. And then, I began to play. My name is Ethan Carter, and I come from a family steeped in musical tradition. My father was a renowned concert pianist, and my mother had been a professional singer before settling down to raise a family. Growing up in such a household, it was only natural that my older brother Matthew and I were exposed to music from an early age. Matthew was a prodigy from the start. He breezed through piano competitions, leaving a trail of trophies and accolades in his wake. His playing was precise, flawless, like a finely tuned machine executing a perfect program. I, on the other hand, was a different story altogether. Don't get me wrong, I loved music. I enjoyed playing various instruments, especially the piano, but I wasn't gifted in the same way Matthew was. When I played, I tended to get carried away, letting my emotions guide my fingers rather than strictly adhering to the sheet music. I couldn't reproduce a piece with Matthew's mechanical precision, and as a result, I never won a single competition. It's hard to believe they're from the same family, people would often remark, their eyes darting between Matthew and me. The older one's a genius, but the younger one, well, I suppose not everyone can be talented. Comments like these were commonplace throughout our childhood. With each comparison, Matthew's confidence grew, along with his condescension towards me. We had been close as young children, but as we grew older, the gap between us widened, both in skill and in our relationship. But our parents, bless them, never gave up on me. My mother would often say, I love listening to Ethan play. There's something so genuine about it. And my father would add,
Ethan's style might not be competition material, but his music is a way of energizing me. Got a heart.
Whenever Matthew was out for lessons or competitions, I would sneak to the piano and play to my heart's content. More often than not, I look up to find my parents listening, their faces beaming with pride and joy. Those moments meant the world to me. I remember one particular day when my father sat me down after a practice session. His eyes were kind as he spoke.
Music is life, Ethan. It's an expression of who we are. You don't need to play like Matthew. You should play like Ethan. Your music is uniquely yours, and that's what makes it beautiful.
He ruffled my hair with his large, calloused hand, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. It was because of moments like these that I never grew to hate music, despite Matthew's increasing disdain for my playing. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. During my sophomore year of high school, our world was turned upside down. My father, while on tour, was involved in a horrific multi-car pileup on the interstate. He didn't survive. The news made national headlines. Renowned pianist John Carter dies in a tragic accident. The shock was overwhelming. When we went to identify his body at the hospital, my mother collapsed from the emotional trauma. The days that followed were a blur of grief and confusion. Our house, once filled with music and laughter, fell silent. The funeral was a grand affair, attended by musicians, critics, and fans from all over the country. But all I could focus on was my mother's pale, drawn face and the deafening silence that seemed to follow us everywhere. As the weeks passed and the initial shock began to subside, a new reality set in, one that we were woefully unprepared for. About a month and a half after the funeral, our mother called Matthew and me into the living room. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Boys, there's something we need to discuss," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been looking at our finances and..." She paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. What followed was a brutally honest discussion about our financial situation. With Dad gone, so was our primary source of income. His sponsorship deals had been terminated, and the future performances were, of course, cancelled. Mom had become a full-time homemaker when she married Dad, so she had no immediate job prospects. We had some savings in Dad's life insurance, but it wasn't going to last forever. The real issue was our education. Both Matthew and I attended prestigious private schools, specializing in music, schools with tuition fees that suddenly seemed astronomical. Heavy silence fell over the room as the reality of our situation sank in. I could see the gears turning in Matthew's head. He was in his final year of high school, already accepted into Juilliard. The thought of giving up his dream must have been unbearable. Before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out of my mouth. "I'll drop out and get a job." Mom's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "Absolutely not! I'll find work. But I cut her off, explaining my reasoning. Matthew was the talented one, the one with a real shot at a music career. He was so close to graduating. It would be a waste for him to quit now. Me? I was a sophomore in middling grades and no notable musical achievements. I could get my GED while working, maybe even attend community college later. I could see the conflict in Mom's eyes, the desire to protect me warring with the cold logic of our situation. Matthew remained silent, but I could tell he was relieved. In the end, Mom reluctantly agreed, though the pain in her eyes was evident. And just like that, at 16 years old, I became a high school dropout and entered the workforce. Reality, as it turned out, was a harsh teacher. I had naively believed that finding a decent job would be easy, but I quickly learned otherwise. My status as a high school dropout severely limited my options. The jobs that paid well were often physically demanding, or came with toxic work environments that I couldn't endure for long. For the next few years, I bounced from one minimum wage job to another, trying to contribute what I could to our household expenses. The future I had once envisioned for myself seemed to slip further away with each passing day. The only solace I found was in playing the piano at home during my free time, losing myself in the music that had once been the center of our family's life. Meanwhile, Matthew graduated from Juilliard with honors and set his sights on becoming a professional pianist. But the music world can be cruel, even to the most talented. Despite his impeccable technique and impressive credentials, Matthew struggled to establish himself as a solo artist. After a year of auditions and rejections, Matthew finally decided to change course. He leveraged his connections from Juilliard to secure a position at a prestigious instrument manufacturing company. It was a respectable job, but I could tell it wasn't what he had dreamed of. The job required Matthew to relocate, which, in a way, was a relief for both of us. Our relationship had become strained over the years, with Matthew often becoming irritated when I played the piano at home. The physical distance gave us both some much-needed space. A few years passed and life settled into a new rhythm. Then, out of the blue, Mom told me that Matthew was getting married. I was shocked. I hadn't even known he was in a serious relationship. But then again, Matthew and I barely spoke anymore. The bride-to-be was named Sophia Whitman, the daughter of the CEO of a major record label that did business with Matthew's company. Mom filled me in on the details. "They're not complete strangers, you know. Sophia and Matt used to compete against each other in piano competitions when they were younger. They were rivals in a sense." As it turned out, they'd also been classmates at Juilliard. Life had taken them on a separate paths, but now they had found their way back to each other. Despite my complicated feelings towards Matthew, I found myself hoping that his relationship would bring him happiness. The idea of attending the wedding filled me with anxiety, but Mom insisted that I should go to the family and meet and greet dinner. Reluctantly, I agreed. The dinner was held in an upscale restaurant, the kind of place I felt out of place in my best clothes. Sophia's parents were clearly wealthy and well-connected. Her father, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, nodded approvingly as he spoke about Matthew.
Well, it might have been disappointing for Matthew not to pursue a career as a concert pianist,
he said, swirling a glass of expensive wine.
I think it's worked out for the best. He's got a stable position in a reputable company, which is far more secure than the life of a performing artist. As a father, I couldn't ask for a better son-in-law.
The conversation flowed smoothly until Sophia's mother turned her attention to me. And what about you, Ethan? What do you do for a living? I felt a lump form in my throat. Well, due to some family circumstances, I had to drop out of high school. I've been working various jobs since then. I guess you could call me a freelancer. I tried to sound casual, but I could feel the temperature of the room drop several degrees. An awkward silence fell over the table. Matthew, who had been reluctant about my presence from the start, muttered under his breath. I told you we shouldn't have invited him. I pretended not to hear, but the words stung nonetheless. Sophia let out an exaggerated sigh, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her wine glass. You know, Matthew and I used to be fierce competitors in the piano world. We may not have become professional musicians, but we both found success in our respective fields. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at me. It's rather embarrassing to have a high school dropout for a brother-in-law. I can't imagine what our friends will say. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to explain the circumstances that led to my dropping out. It was clear that Matthew hadn't shared that part of our family history with his fiancée. Unable to contain herself, Sophia continued. I heard you used to play music too. What happened? Couldn't handle the pressure? Or did you just lack the necessary work ethic? Her words ignited a spark of anger within me. I still play music, I retorted, trying to keep my voice level. I may not be a professional, but I enjoy playing pieces that make people feel good. It's more of a hobby now. Sophia's laughter was sharp and derisive. A hobby? How quaint! I suppose that's all someone like you can aspire to. Playing for fun while the rest of us actually contribute to society. Aren't you a bit old to be living in a fantasy world? You're in your mid-20s, for heaven's sake. I could see Mom's face contort with anger, ready to jump to my defense, but I subtly shook my head. There was no point in causing a scene. It wouldn't change anything. Matthew, perhaps sensing the tension, tried to intervene. Ethan's always been a bit unconventional. He marches to the beat of his own drum, so to speak. His words were meant to smooth things over, but I could hear the underlying condescension. It was the same tone he used since we were kids, always positioning himself as superior. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced smiles and stilted conversation. As soon as was politely possible, Mom and I made our excuses and left. In the car ride home, Mom couldn't contain her outrage any longer. The nerve of that woman! And Matthew, just sitting there and letting her talk to you like that. You should have told him the truth about why you left school, Ethan. You sacrificed so much for this family. I sighed, watching the city lights blur past the car window. It wouldn't have made a difference, Mom. People like that, they see what they want to see. No amount of explanation would change their minds. The truth was, I had long ago accepted my role as the family disappointment, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt to be reminded of it so blatantly. As the wedding day approached, my anxiety grew. Part of me wanted to skip the event entirely, but I knew that wasn't an option. So, on a bright Saturday morning, I found myself adjusting my rented tux in front of the mirror, trying to look like I belonged in the world of a country club weddings and champagne toast. The ceremony was held in a picturesque chapel, all stained glass and polished wood. I sat near the back watching as Matthew and Sophia exchanged vows. Despite my mixed feelings, I had to admit, they made a striking couple. Both tall and elegant, looking like they stepped out of a bridal magazine. The reception was held in an exclusive golf club, the kind of place that was probably cost more for one night than I made in a month. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres I couldn't pronounce. Mom nudged me gently. We should go congratulate them, she whispered, nodding towards where Matthew and Sophia were greeting guests. Reluctantly, I followed her to the receiving line. Matthew accepted our congratulations with a distracted smile. When I turned to Sophia, she acted as if I wasn't even there. Thinking she might not have heard me, I repeated my congratulations, only to be met with an unmistakable eye roll and a click of her tongue. I could feel Mom tense beside me, but before she could say anything, Sophia leaned in close, her voice low and venomous. "Let's get one thing straight. I don't consider you family, not even by marriage. You're an embarrassment, still leeching off your mother at your age. People like you, who can't be bothered to put in any effort, don't belong in my world." I stepped back, stung by her words, but not entirely surprised. It was clear that Sophia had made up her mind about me long before we had ever met. As I made my way to my assigned table, I tried to shake off Sophia's cruel words. This was just one day, I reminded myself. Once it was over, I wouldn't have to see her again. The reception was every bit as lavish as I expected. Sophia, true to her socialite upbringing, changed outfits multiple times throughout the evening, each dress more elaborate than the last. She commanded attention like a star actress on opening night, basking in the admiration of the guests. As the night wore on, it was time for the entertainment portion of the evening. The MC announced that the bride herself would be performing a piano piece as the grand finale of the evening's performances. Sophia took her place at the grand piano, her fingers poised elegantly over the keys. The piece she chose was a complex classical composition, the kind that showcased technical skill and years of training. Her performance was flawless, each note crisp and precise, just as you expect from a Juilliard graduate. However, as I glanced around the room, I noticed that while the adults were suitably impressed, the younger guests, especially the children, seemed restless. The piece, while technically impressive, lacked the warmth and accessibility that could capture the attention of a diverse audience. As Sophia played the final notes, the room erupted into applause. She stood, taking a deep bow, her face glowing with pride. The MC stepped forward, ready to wrap up the entertainment portion of the evening. That's when things took an unexpected turn. Sophia suddenly grabbed that microphone from the MC, her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto me. My stomach dropped as I realized what was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice syrupy sweet, "I've just learned that my new brother-in-law is quite the pianist himself. Wouldn't it be wonderful if he could favor us with a performance?" I felt the blood drain from my face as all eyes in the room turned to me. Frantically, I shook my head, trying to decline, but Sophia was already making her way towards me, the microphone still in hand. "Don't be shy, Ethan," she cooed, her grip on my arm surprisingly strong as she pulled me to my feet. "I'm sure we're all curious to hear what kind of music a high school dropout can produce. After all, you come from such a musical family." As she dragged me towards the piano, I could hear whispers rippling through the crowd. Sophia leaned in close, her lips nearly touching my ear as she hissed, "You're nothing but a prop, you worthless excuse for a brother-in-law. The least you can do is make yourself useful when making me look good. Go on, embarrass yourself. It's all you're good for." I found myself pushed onto the piano bench, my head spinning. The gleaming keys before me seemed to stretch on forever. I was vaguely aware of Matthew on the dice, looking uncomfortable but making no move to intervene. From somewhere in the back of the room, a voice thick with alcohol called out, "Let's go, dropout! You do know which end of the piano to sit at, right?" Laughter rippled through the room, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. As I sat there frozen, a memory surfaced, my father's voice, warm and encouraging.
"You know, Ethan, there's something special about your music. It always manages to lift people's spirits. Never lose that gift."
Taking a deep breath, I placed my fingers gently on the keys. As I did, a sense of calm washed over me, chasing away the anxiety and embarrassment. This was my element after all. I may not be a Juilliard graduate or a competition winner, but music was in my blood. I started with the traditional wedding march, playing it straight for a few bars before seamlessly transitioning into a medley of popular love songs. I infused each piece with my own style, adding flourishes and improvisations that made the familiar tunes fresh and exciting. As I played, I could feel the energy in the room shift. The whispers died down, replaced by a growing interest. I snuck a glance at the crowd and saw toes tapping and heads nodding along to the music. Encouraged, I transitioned into a melody of upbeat, celebratory songs. I made sure to include a mix of genres, pop, rock, even a bit of country, to cater to the diverse crowd. For the older guests, I threw in some classical oldies, earning appreciative smiles from the senior attendees. As the tempo picked up, so did my confidence. I began incorporating some of my signature moves, quick handovers, playful key strikes, and even some rhythmic body movements that added a visual element to the performance. I could hear exclamations from the crowd now. "Wow, he's really good! Oh, I love this song!" Some people had even started to clap along with the music. By now, I was fully in my element, letting the music flow through me. I transitioned from one song to another, sometimes blending 2 or 3 together, in unexpected but harmonious ways. I must have played snippets of at least a dozen songs, each one chosen to evoke joy and celebration. For my finale, I chose a popular song from a recent movie musical, known for its upbeat tempo and catchy chorus. As I played the final notes, I realized that the room had fallen silent. For a moment, I feared I had overstepped, that my unconventional performance had somehow offended the crowd. But then, I heard it. A single pair of hands clapping. I looked up to see a young girl, no more than 8 or 9, standing right in front of the piano, applauding with a huge grin on her face. Within seconds, others joined in, and suddenly the entire room was on its feet. The applause was thunderous, far beyond anything I had expected. I stood, somewhat dazed, and took a deep bow, just as I'd seen Sophia do earlier. As the applause began to die down, I heard a commotion near the back of the room. A group of young women were huddled around a smartphone, pointing and whispering excitedly. "Wait a minute," one of them said, her voice carrying across the now quiet room. "Isn't this the same guy from those viral street piano videos? The one they call the Piano Man?" Another woman chimed in. "Oh my god, you're right! I'm a huge fan, I can't believe he's here!" I felt a mix of embarrassment and pride wash over me. It seemed my secret identity had been revealed. You see, a few years back, I had started playing piano at public spaces, train stations, parks, anywhere I could find a public piano. A friend had suggested recording these impromptu performances and posting them online. At first, I was hesitant, but I decided to give it a shot. To my surprise, the video started gaining traction. People seemed to appreciate my unconventional style, and the way I could seamlessly blend different genres of music. I always wore sunglasses in the videos to maintain some anonymity, but it seemed my playing style was distinctive enough to be recognized. Over time, my online following grew. What started as a hobby turned into a legitimate source of income through ad revenue and online tips. I even got the opportunity to go on a nationwide tour with other internet musicians, performing live shows in various cities. And now, here I was, my 2 worlds colliding in the most unexpected way. Sensing the need to adjust the situation, I stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for listening," I said, my voice shaky but gaining strength. I may not have the formal training or credentials of the bride, but music has always been a huge part of my life. I found my own path in the music world, and if my playing can bring a smile to someone's face, or add a little extra joy to a celebration like this, then I consider that a success. As I stepped away from the microphone, the room once again burst into applause. Making my way back to my seat, I caught sight of Matthew and Sophia. My brother looked stunned, as if seeing me for the first time. Sophia, on the other hand, wore an expression of barely contained fury. I could see her mouth moving, forming words that were drowned out by the continuing applause. But I didn't need to hear to understand what she was saying. "I don't accept this," she seemed to be repeating, her face contorting with anger and disbelief. As I sat down, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. For once, I wasn't the family disappointment. For once, I had shown that my way of approaching music, unconventional as it might be, had value too. Little did I know, this moment would set in motion a series of events that would change the dynamics of our family forever. A few days after the wedding, I received a surprising call from my mother. Her voice was a mix of excitement and disbelief as she shared some unexpected news. "Ethan, you won't believe what's happened," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Matthew called off the wedding." I nearly dropped my phone in shock. "What? But they just got married. How is it even possible?" Mom went on to explain that Matthew had shown up at our house late last night, looking exhausted and carrying a suitcase. He had moved out of the apartment he had shared with Sophia and wanted to stay with us for a while. As if on cue, I heard the front door open and Matthew walked in. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us knew what to say. It had been years since we'd been in the same room without the buffer of a family event or obligation. To my surprise, Matthew's eyes were kind, reminiscent of the brother I knew in childhood, before competition and expectations had driven a wedge between us. Over coffee, Matthew filled us in on what had transpired since the wedding reception. According to him, Sophia had always had a somewhat domineering and self-centered streak, but he had believed it to be within acceptable limits.
I knew she could be a bit intense,
Matthew admitted, stirring his coffee absently.
but I thought it was just ambition, you know? The drive to be the best. I admired that about her, in a way.
But the events at the wedding reception had opened his eyes to a side of Sophia he couldn't ignore. Her treatment of me, the deliberate attempt to humiliate me in front of everyone, it was beyond the pale.
I had no idea she was planning to put you on the spot like that,
Matthew said, looking at me apologetically.
When I saw what was happening, I froze. I should have stepped in, and I'm sorry I didn't.
Matthew went on to explain that Sophia's behavior had only worsened after my performance. In the privacy of their suite, she had thrown a full-blown tantrum, ranting about how I had ruined her perfect wedding.
She was livid,
Matthew said, shaking his head in disbelief.
throwing things, screaming about how she'd been upstaged by a no-talent dropout. And I tried to calm her down, to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen.
The tantrum had continued until the next day, casting a pall over what should have been the start of their honeymoon. When Matthew suggested they take a step back and reevaluate things, Sophia had exploded again.
She threatened to have her father cut ties with my company,
Matthew said, his voice tight with anger and disappointment.
She said she ruined my career if I didn't get with the program and put you in your place. That's when I knew I couldn't go through with it.
I listened to all of this with a mixture of shock and a strange sense of vindication. I'm sorry, Matt, I said, using the nickname I hadn't used since we were kids. I never meant to cause problems for you. Matthew shook his head, a wry smile on his face.
Don't apologize, Ethan. If anything, I should be thanking you. Your performance, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten.
He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distanced with memory.
Do you remember when we were kids and Dad used to play those ridiculous melodies for us? Mixing cartoon themes with classical pieces? Throwing in pop songs? And I used to think it was so unprofessional.
I nodded, smiling at the memory. Those impromptu concerts had been some of my favorite moments from our childhood.
Watching you play at the reception,
Matthew continued.
It was like seeing Dad again. The joy, the energy, it made me realize how much I've lost touch with why I fell in love with music in the first place.
There was a moment of silence as we all absorbed the weight of Matthew's words. Then almost shyly, he asked,
Do you think maybe you could show me how to do some of those transitions? The way you blend different songs together is really impressive.
I felt a lump form in my throat. After years of feeling inferior, of being the family disappointment, to hear Matthew express admiration for my skills was almost overwhelming. Of course, I managed to say. I'd love to. As we talked, I remembered something. Oh, by the way, I got an interesting offer the other day. Sophia's father's company reached out to me. They want me to play piano for one of their commercials. Matthew's eyebrows shot up in surprise.
Really? That's unexpected.
I nodded, still somewhat bemused by the whole situation. I haven't given them an answer yet. It feels a bit weird considering everything that's happened. Matthew thought for a moment, then let out a small chuckle.
You know what? You should do it. It'd serve Sophia right to see you succeed.
We all laughed at that, the tension of the past few days finally beginning to ease. Over the next few weeks, a new routine began to form in our household. Matthew started playing the piano again, not with the rigid perfectionism of his competition days, but with a newfound sense of joy and experimentation. I continued with my street performances and online presence, but now I had a new collaborator. Matthew and I started working on duets, blending his classical training with my more eclectic style. The results were surprisingly harmonious, and our online audience seemed to love the brotherly collaboration. As for Sophia, we heard through the grapevine that she had quit her job at her father's company shortly after the wedding debacle. Apparently, the gossip about our behavior at the reception had made the work environment uncomfortable for her. Her pride couldn't handle the whispers and sideway glances, so she stormed out, burning the bridges in the process. One evening, as Matthew and I were working on a new arrangement, he paused and looked at me thoughtfully.
You know, Ethan,
he said, his fingers hovering over the keys.
I owe you an apology.
I stopped playing, surprised by the sudden seriousness in his tone. What for? Matthew sighed, running a hand through his hair.
For everything. For the way I treated you growing up. For looking down on your music. for not standing up for you at the wedding. And I was so caught up in trying to be the best and living up to Dad's legacy that I forgot what really matters.
I felt a lump form in my throat. Years of pent-up emotions, hurt, resentment, longing for my brother's approval, welled up inside me. Matt, He held up a hand, stopping me.
Let me finish, please. And I've been thinking a lot about what Dad used to say to us. Remember how he always insisted that music was about expression, not just technical perfection?
I nodded, remembering those conversations vividly.
I lost sight of that,
Matthew continued.
I was so focused on playing every note perfectly that I forgot to put any feeling into it. But you never lost that. Your music has always had heart, Ethan. That's something I'm only now learning to rediscover.
Tears pricked at the corner of my eyes. To hear those words from Matthew, after all these years, was more healing than I could have imagined. Thanks, Matt, I said softly. That means a lot. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reminded me of the brother I'd known before competition and rivalry had come between us.
So, what do you say we show the world that the Carter brothers can really do when we work together?
From that day forward, our relationship transformed. We began collaborating regularly, both online and in live performances. Matthew's technical prowess combined with my improvisational skills created a unique sound that resonated with a wide audience. We started small, with local gigs and online videos, but word spread quickly. Our contrasting styles, brotherly banter, and the genuine joy we found in playing together struck a chord with people. Before long, we were being invited to perform at larger venues, music festivals, and even on national television. The irony wasn't lost on us. Matthew, the former prodigy who had struggled to make it as a solo artist, and me, the high school dropout who had found success in an unconventional way, were now achieving more together than we ever had apart. Her mother was overjoyed to see us not only reconciled but thriving together. She often said in our practice sessions, her eyes shining with pride and a hint of nostalgia, "Your father would be so proud," she'd say, her voice thick with emotion. As our popularity grew, we decided to use our platform for good. We started a music education program for underprivileged kids, teaching them that there's no one right way to approach music. We want to inspire creativity and passion, not just technical skill. One day, about a year after the fateful wedding, we received an unexpected email. It was from Sophia. The message was brief and somewhat stiff, but the content surprised us both. She apologized for her behavior at the wedding, and in days that followed, she admitted that seeing our success had forced her to reevaluate her own attitudes towards music and life in general. "I realize now that I was so focused on being the best that I forgot to enjoy the music," she wrote. "Watching your videos, seeing the joy you both bring to your performances, it's made me remember why I fell in love with piano in the first place." She ended the email by wishing us continued success and expressing hope that someday, we might all be able to let bygones be bygones. Matthew and I sat in silence for a while after reading the email, processing this unexpected olive branch.
"Well,"
Matthew finally said, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth.
"I guess music really does have the power to change people."
I nodded, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. "Maybe we should send her an invitation to our next concert," I suggested. Matthew laughed.
"You know what? Why not? It might be interesting to see if she's really changed."
As I sat there with my brother, planning our next move in this unexpected journey we found ourselves on, I couldn't help but marvel at how things had turned out. From feeling like the family disappointment to finding my own path in music. From being estranged from my brother to becoming his closest collaborator. Life had taken me on a wild ride. But through it all, one thing remained constant. The power of music to bring people together, to heal old wounds, and to remind us of what truly matters in life. I thought back to that moment at the wedding, sitting at the piano with all eyes on me. If someone had told me then that it would be the start of this incredible journey, I never would have believed them. But here we are, proof that sometimes the most beautiful melodies come from the most unexpected places. As Matthew and I turned back to the piano, ready to work on our next piece, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. This is where I belonged. Not trying to fit into someone else's idea of success, but creating my own path, one note at a time. The melody we created that day was unlike anything we'd done before. It was a perfect blend of Matthew's classical training and my improvisational style, a testament to how far we come in the bright future that lay ahead. As we played, I could almost hear our father's voice, warm and proud.
That's it, boys. That's the music I always knew you had in you.
And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, as long as we had our music and each other, we could face anything. The Carter brothers were just getting started, and the world was ready to listen.